Hi everyone, my name is Catherine Murphy and here is my presentation on Tibet. Okay, first things first, where is it? Tibet is in the western region of China. In most maps that you'll look at, it is included within China, but the people in Tibet feel that it should be its own state, which is the main point of conflict between the two parties. All right. So here is a simplified version of both arguments, and we will delve in deeper throughout the rest of the PowerPoint. The first is that the Tibetans argue that they actually overthrew the Chinese government in 1912, and then when China re-invaded Tibet in 1951, they were violating international law, and they are now in occupied territory. One point to their argument is that China actually negotiated treaties with the state of Tibet during World War II, which shows that China then at least acknowledged some version of Tibetan independence, because you wouldn't negotiate a treaty with yourself. The Tibet does have its own government. Government in exile is in India and is the Central Tibetan Administration. It is not officially recognized by any nation, but many, including the US, have given it aid. It is run by Dr. Sangai. It used to be run by the Dalai Lama, but he gave it over to Dr. Sangai. It takes care of refugee Tibetans, approximately 100,000 right now. It runs hospitals and schools for them, and it is trying to lead the fight for free Tibet. Now, the Chinese argument is that Tibet has actually always been part of China. It has been since the 1200s. It has had a protectorate status for some of its time, but it has always been part of the Chinese nation. It says that the Chinese People's Liberation Army freed Tibet from the imperialists in 1951, and it has the 17-point agreement, which the Dalai Lama signed in 1959. He claims, and the Tibetan people claim, that it is not a valid agreement because it was signed under duress because he was 15 years old at the time, and he and everyone else has renounced it. It said that Tibet was part of China, but it also said that the Tibetan people would have some control over, they would have some form of autonomy, but now they claim that China has not, in fact, given that to them at all. So the main causes of protests are the pollution of the environment, human rights abuses, and cultural genocide, as the Dalai Lama and many other, including Western historians, have characterized it as. So for the pollution of the environment, China has relaxed a lot of environmental regulations in Tibet in order to encourage Chinese companies to move there. They are particularly focused on copper, gold, iron, uranium for nuclear weapons, and fossil fuels. Because they have relaxed these environmental regulations, the Tibetan people and its land are becoming polluted and poisoned. Many livestock and food are dying, and that's harming the Tibetan people. China is denying this. It also is saying that this is good for the economy, on Chinese to work in these factories, and so the wealth actually isn't going to many Tibetans at all. And instead they're just bearing the consequences by having their livelihoods, the food that they eat from the rivers and the crops that they harvest die in front of them. They also say that they're suffering many human rights abuses from China. Human Rights Watch, a very renowned international organization, has condemned China, and many others have followed suit. They report that all promotion of Tibetan language and culture has now become illegal. Groups no larger than five are not allowed to meet without permission. And if you can't meet together, how are you supposed to celebrate your own culture and ensure its longevity? Any protests or organizations about the environment and wildlife are illegal, which makes it very hard for them to, as we talked about before, figure out how to fix their own environment. All traditional forms of social organizations, such as councils to figure out familial disputes and land, any sort of social welfare program, have been deemed organized crime and are illegal. Tibet, all urban areas of Tibet are also under constant video surveillance, and all people's movements are constantly recorded. All of what they say is recorded, which Tibetan people are saying violates their right to privacy and free speech. Now, the Tibetan people are also saying that the Chinese government is embarking on a task of cultural genocide. This term has been used by the Dalai Lama and multiple Western historians and commentators as well. Part of their claim is that the government is forcing nomadic herders to relocate to urban areas, destroying a way of life that has existed for thousands of years. As previously mentioned, there's drastic restrictions on religion and any cultural gatherings, and if you can't have those, then you lose your culture. People are not allowed to have pictures of the Dalai Lama or Panchen Lama up. Some people have resorted to hiding them in their lockets and other discreet places. Throughout the squares and towns, loudspeakers blare, "We are part of a Chinese nation contributing to a great future. We are Chinese people," which they say is a form of brainwashing. All classes in schools are taught in Mandarin. Portraits of Mao hang in all schools, even though some don't recognize him as their teacher. They say that this assault on the Tibetan language is going to lead it to die out, and if you can't have your language, then you're going to lose much of your history and culture. And then most importantly, there is a mass relocation of ethnic Hans into Tibet. A railroad was recently built from Beijing into the capital of Tibet, Lhasa. The Chinese government has authorized the relocation of 280,000 Chinese Han into Tibet in order to start swinging the balance and influencing the culture of Tibet. If right now the current ethnic Hans there are richer than the Tibetans, so they have more power, but there's still a larger amount of Tibetans, so that they are still able to rally together and form some kind of significant protest and still maintain their culture. But if more Hans and Tibetans move in, they will lose that power of the majority, and they will become extremely disenfranchised and a minority that's even easier to silence than they currently are right now. They will have neither wealth nor size to their advantage. You can see right here that the amount of ethnic Hans has drastically increased from about 400 in 1949 to 440,000 total, which is about, approximately a third to a fourth of the population. All these numbers are rough estimates, and the number of Han have drastically increased. Now, another part of which has created a large international outcry as well, of this claim of cultural genocide, is that in Buddhism there is the Panchen Lama, who is the second most important figure of Buddhism, and he helps identify the Dalai Lama. When he's reincarnated, they go back and forth and find each other, essentially, and help lead the religion and the Tibetan people. The Dalai Lama found the Panchen Lama within Tibet and named him, and he is widely recognized by the Tibetan people as the true Panchen Lama. But then China came in and they took him away. No one knows where he currently is. He has been deemed the youngest political prisoner in the world. China refuses to acknowledge his location, and they actually then went and found their own Panchen Lama and named him as the true one. Many people see this as an attempt for China to try to control Tibetan religion and culture, and enable them to no longer have this source Buddhism, their Buddhism, as a source of rallying and strength for the Tibetan people. One particularly important way that people have tried to gain recognition for their cause is through self-immolations. This is an extremely popular form of protest for the Tibetan people and has promoted international outcry against China for Tibet. So far, by June 5th, 2017, 148 self-immolations have been confirmed. 2 were disputed. These are primarily Buddhist monks and nuns. All right, so are there solutions to this problem? So far, this is an incredibly difficult situation. China is unrelenting in its position. This is because Tibet is extremely valuable to it. It has many natural resources. Many rivers originate in Tibet, so they don't want to lose control of that water supply. They don't want to lose. So right now, China's been cultivating arguably a strong man kind of reputation. And if they acknowledge that Tibet should be its own country or at least have some form of independence, they will see that as a sign of weakness that they will be giving off to the international community, and they don't want to do that. The Dalai Lama, who's essentially the leader of the Tibetan resistance, used to argue for complete independence from China, but has now come about to a little bit of a compromise. At least he's open to it, he says. Maybe having China be some like Hong Kong or Macau, but now he's starting to worry because of Hong Kong's aggressive tendencies. Because of China's aggressive tendencies in Hong Kong, he thinks they won't actually respect Tibet. The Tibetan government wants Tibet to be a place of peace. They want China to abandon its policy of transferring people into there, and it wants China to respect their tradition of fundamental human and democratic rights. It claims, and for China to stop using Tibet as a place to produce and nuclear weapons and then dispose of nuclear waste. It says that if China can agree to these terms, then they can try to come about and figure out some kind of agreement. Maybe they won't have complete independence, but they have some form of autonomy. Currently, China claims that they do have that, but they're saying China isn't actually recognizing it, so they want China to actually set up concrete means of enforcing this autonomy, having maybe a separate government for Tibet, which reports to the Chinese government, but has elected Tibetan officials running it, and that's been one proposal. But so far, China has refused to do any of this, and it is highly unlikely that it will do so unless there is serious international pressure put upon China. But it doesn't look like there's going to be anytime soon, because China has essentially threatened and said that if anyone starts siding with Tibet, we will impose sanctions or stop trading, or some other economic consequence will be brought upon that nation. And so far, no one's been willing to risk that. There is a ticking clock on this because, one, the import of mass ethnic Han Chinese and Tibetans are saying if too many Hans come in, then their voices will be silenced, and China is aggressively pursuing that policy. And also, the Dalai Lama has said that he might be the very last one, because a new Dalai Lama will not be found within Chinese-controlled Tibet. And if he resigns, or if he's the end, then Tibet might lose a leader. Here are my citations. All right, thank you. This has been my presentation on Tibet. It is an incredibly grim circumstance, and right now there doesn't appear to be any good solutions available, unfortunately.